So we've had some great content about PWA today already, but I wanted to start change up a little bit and talk about our new Page Builder product and kind of a technical introduction to it. So I'm Dave Macaulay. I'm a full stack engineer at Magento. I've been with Magento about a year, and I came over from the Bluefoot acquisition from Gene Commerce. You can follow me on Twitter at Hello Macaulay if you want to keep in touch, or see the random stuff I post about. It's not very interesting. So first I want to start off with introducing you to the Page Builder interface. This is a new product by us, so it's probably not familiar to many of you. So on the left we have a thing we call the panel. This is where we house all of the content types and groups, and on the right we have the stage. And the interactions here are all drag and drop, so we can drag content from the panel into the stage and it will create a new content type instance. In this instance, we've added a heading which has live editing capabilities. This means we show a live edit toolbar and live edit text. This enables the content manager to write their content fluidly in the stage without needing to go into the edit form. Once we unfocus this, we are presented with our options menu, which allows us to do the normal things you'd expect in a page builder: move, duplicate, remove, and edit. So I want to move into a quick demo. As I said, this product's new. I'm sure a lot of you aren't very familiar with it yet. So let's build a Meet Magento style page. So firstly, we have media gallery integration in the UI component fields, allowing us to pull images directly from the media gallery. And we have custom fields to make the experience a lot better and more fluid. So here you can see we've added a background image to the row. It displays in the admin as you'd expect. Here we're adding some columns in so we can separate our content out. With the new color picker, we can easily decide a 80% alpha on a white background, and we can set some paddings to make sure our content is in the right place. Then we're going to add a heading. This is going to kind of be like a call-out slide at the top, and what a better place to promote myself. And then we can add a text box to add some more information, fluent in Latin, obviously. And finally, we can resize it to give some more exposure to the image behind. Then we can move on to add some of our more complex content types. For instance, the tabs instance. Again, we have live editing capabilities here, which means we can easily modify the tab's name in context. And we can drag any content type within this tabs instance. For instance, here we're using columns again. We have a new image type where we can drop images. Here's my good colleague, James Zetlin, DJing. I think we're a bit drunk at this point. And we can add some headings to introduce him, DJ James Zeppelin. I feel like that should be his name here. And obviously introduce his band name. Pretty awesome audio. Oh, pretty wicked audio, sorry. Which, acronym for PWA. And then finally we can add some text just to introduce him again. I thought it'd be best to write this in Latin as I didn't have much to say about him. So we can then add an additional tab easily, again, with an in-context live edit to change the name. And we want people to know where this event is. So we can add a map content type. This is a Google Maps integration, and we can easily add multiple locations, but we'll just add this theater. I also can't spell. So now you can see on the stage we have the map displaying fully and how it would display on the front end. I forgot to add some description about the event. Right now you don't really know what's going on apart from the fact I'm speaking somewhere. So it's great if we add some more rich text with some headings. This I thought I'd steal from the Meet Magento site rather than write in Latin. And then finally, on this landing page, I want a way for people to buy tickets in context. So we can drag our products Magento blog into the row and configure it using the conditions. And I'll just use SKU as I only want to show one product here, but these conditions can be built up to display any amount of content, any amount of products that are supported by the conditions. I also realize it being on the left doesn't look too great, so we'll center that. And then you can see we've built a pretty nice page in a couple of minutes. Historically in Magento, this would be really difficult. And you can see as within the admin, everything renders as you'd expect. And we can add the product right there and then, and our landing page is done. So now, I must apologize, we're going to get quite code heavy. Bit of an architectural overview. We've introduced a lot of new APIs, so I thought the best way to illustrate these was to show you some code. So an overview, we're no longer using EAV. This was how Bluefoot worked, and it meant to install a content type, you had to write some complex setup scripts. This made it really difficult for third parties to add new content types easily. So in true Magento fashion, we've moved to declarative content types, obviously using XML. Who doesn't love XML? We've also moved the master storage format to be entirely in HTML. We embed metadata in this format, and then we parse this out when we're reading it from the master format, and any additional widgets on the front end can read this data as well. Something that I'm really excited about, we use TypeScript and ES6 with a Babel compiler so we can use modern tooling and functionality in JavaScript. And another exciting thing, as I'm sure most of you don't really like UI components, it's general consensus across the Magento community, we've not really used them that much. The whole of the actual Page Builder app is just in pure ES6 TypeScript classes. So there's no overhead of the UI component framework, and there's no overuse of XML. But with that, as you saw in the demo, we have used those UI components for the forms, so you have that full experience of editing content as you normally would in other places in Magento. So to start off with our declarative content types, here comes all the code. So these are a simple XML format. They reference some basic data about the content type. So for instance, here we have the row content type. We assign some simple things like a label and an icon. These are the things shown in the left panel and within the stage when you're using the content. Then we just define a component. This defines whether it's a content type or a content type collection. A content type is something like a heading that just contains various different attributes to build that content. And a content type collection is something that can contain other content types and content type collections. For instance, a row in this case. We then define a preview component and a content component. We have this notion of the preview, which is in the admin, and the master format, which is the content. And we separate these two out, and we allow you to define custom components for these to add additional JavaScript or logic into those aspects of the application. We then define the form. This is just a reference to a UI component form. And a group, again, the group is just the section in the left panel. And the allowed parents. This is basically the matrix which we determine where this block can go in the stage. So for instance, if you had a restricted block that could only go inside a certain content type, you could define it here. This is, we're still actively working on this to improve this and make sure it's unified and easy to use before final release, but this is in its current state right now. So then, the thing that looks kind of complicated until you wrap your head around it is the way we've done data mapping. So as I said earlier, we have this HTML master storage format and these preview templates. And we've abstracted out the way you write and read data from those areas. So for instance, here we're defining an appearance, and we define elements within each appearance. So in this instance, we only have a main element. And then on the main element, we are saying the style properties of kind of border and margins, attributes of the role of the block, so for instance, row, and then the appearance, which as you can have multiple appearances to different content types, meaning you could have a heading with multiple different appearances added by third-party modules, which allows you to have many different versions of the same content type. We also display, we also add the tag, as we need to know what heading type this is in this instance, and the HTML, which gets the heading text out. Along with this, we apply any CSS classes that the user may add in the admin. The interesting bit here is the preview template and the render template. This goes back to what I talked about earlier with those two areas we have, preview and master, or we kind of call it content sometimes. And these basically define the actual markup for those areas. So as I mentioned, the master storage format, it's HTML using knockout bindings. There's no PHTML here, it's all JavaScript rendered. It's automatically rendered whenever there's a modification in the stage. We have an underlying event system, which fires events when anything changes in whenever we need to rebuild the data. We can easily reference the dating mapping configuration through data dot, then the element name from the last slide. And we can access any additional functionality in that custom content component. This means we can manipulate data, change things around, and kind of get the full power of JavaScript when we're rendering this master template. And down the bottom here, you can see an example for the heading. You can see we're using Magento's kind of abstracted knockout bindings here. But in essence, we're saying a heading. If the heading type is H1, we display this element. And then we apply the attributes using the knockout attribute, styles, CSS, and HTML. Then we have the preview templates. This is the other side that's displayed in the admin. These are very similar to the master templates, just these have some extra requirements to make the interactions in the admin work correctly. For instance, we have to render the options panel, which I showed you earlier, along with adding some additional events for mouse over and mouse out. And there's a slightly different syntax in here because we're still actively working on this. And as I said earlier, the thing I'm most excited about with this project is we've changed the way Magento views JavaScript. We've brought in something new. And with that, we've written all of the code in TypeScript and ES6. This has allowed us to use things like ES6 classes, typings, and all the other great stuff that comes with ES6. But we still support the same browsers that Magento supports today as we compile this down to IE11 and other modern browsers' compatibility with Babel. So let's put this into play and let's build a content type. Let's pretend your designer has come up with a revolutionary new design. I feel like someone at some point has been given a sketch file or a Photoshop with some weird grid like this. To me, this reminds me kind of a squashed Chrome logo. Nice call out for you there. But it also reminds me more of something that should be familiar to a lot of you. Who recognizes this? So this is the sample content Luma homepage. This is something that right now in Magento is built using a myriad of static blocks and hard-coded HTML and other things that generally scare me. People trying to edit this when they install the sample data, it's nearly impossible. I think the headings might even be images. I don't even know. It's not great. It's not a great experience for anyone. So Page Builder can come to the rescue here. We don't have the functionality to build this kind of grid out of the box with Page Builder as it is, but we can definitely add it. So we can implement new containers easily. For instance, we already have row, column, and tab items. We can utilize display grid to actually build that grid for us. And then Page Builder will do the rest of the heavy lifting. So the plan is we're going to implement two new content types. One for the homepage grid, the outer content type, and then the internal homepage grid items that will contain the other content. So firstly, we need to create a simple Magento 2 module. This is pretty basic stuff. Your etc module registration and composer JSON. Then we need to add our content type configuration for the grid. Again, this is similar to the example I showed earlier. We're only overriding the preview component here, as the rest of the default configuration is fine for what we need. The other interesting thing we're doing is we're saying the allow parents here are just the stage. So this is going to be kind of a root level element that can go in between other rows. We also need to define the grid item that goes inside the grid. So with this again, we're only overriding the preview component, as Page Builder will handle the rest of the logic. Again, the allow parents here is different, as we're saying this can only go in the homepage grid. But we're also saying this isn't visible. So we don't want people to drag a grid item into the stage without there being a grid there. So what we're going to do is we're going to have the grid automatically create the children. So again, appearances, something that looks incredibly intimidating and scary. It's a lot of XML, but once you dig into it, it does start making sense. In this instance, we're using a very similar configuration to the existing row. We're allowing backgrounds and any advanced section, which is text alignment, borders, and so on and so forth. You probably can't read it, but that's all the properties here. It seems like a lot of XML, but it does make it easier from past implementations we had of this. And also down the bottom, we are referencing custom preview and master templates, as we need to configure how this is going to look. So now for the grid templates. For the preview one, this is very simple. We just want it to render its children. So we're applying the same attributes, style, and CSS knockout bindings to bring that into the preview. And then we're applying the mouse over events, the options template, and we're doing this render of preview child template. When you render this, it just renders all children within this content type. And the master template's even simpler. It's the same sort of format, we just lose the event, and we're doing render child template instead. We are looking to unify these two templates at the moment. These are very similar, but we want to get them closer to unify the experience when building these kind of templates. And then we have the grid item template. This is basically the same as the previous template. We've just added an empty container state, which shows that it's an empty grid item when it's on the stage. We also added a display label. That's a bit nicer. So I mentioned earlier we need to populate this grid when it's added. So we do that by the custom preview component. So we have the event system that I spoke about earlier. And within that, we have this event called dropped create. This is whenever something is dropped from the left panel into the stage. So this is the only time we want to populate that grid. So we can observe that function and then call our populate grid function. And as you can see down here, we just do an iterate, a loop 5 times and run our create content type factory with some basic configuration and add the newly created content type into the parent. We also need to disable the grid items options. These grid items can only ever be inside the grid, and there can only ever be the amount that we've defined already, which is 5. So we do that through, again, the preview component here, and we basically override retrieve options, and we filter out the ones we don't want. We are actively changing this to more of a declarative way, so you wouldn't need to write JavaScript for this. You could do this completely through the configuration. So, and then obviously we need some styling. This is some nice display grid stuff. Obviously with less, we have to put the tilde in front of everything because it tries to do your math for you, which is annoying. But as you can see, very simple styling. Page Builder has all the styles you generally need apart from anything custom for the borders and other aspects. So the result, we have this nice grid with all the grid items inside it. And you can see when we hover over, the options bar is displayed, the borders change, and you can see the grid item and the grid both have their different options as you'd expect from the code we've written. So finally, we need to add in our forms. This is where we go back to UI component land, which I'm sure no one wants to go to ever, but they're not awful, I promise you. So firstly, we have to add a layout file. This just tells Magento to load our UI component on the page. And then we configure our form as we normally would. These are standard UI component forms. These are what you're used to building for every other part of your application. The only addition is we do have an appearance field, which is required just in case another third party decides to add an appearance to your content type. It means it will automatically be pulled in and work out the box. So now you can see the forms here. We have the background options and the advanced section on both the grid and the grid item. So they're kind of similar. So what can we do with this? If you remember earlier from the sample data Luma content, we can now build that entirely in Page Builder. So each of the grid items has the background image from the Luma sample data, along with adding the headings and the copy and buttons into each of the sections. We've separated the content out with using our column system, and the bottom two over here, we've added an opaque white background as per the front end. And here you can see the front end of the Page Builder rendered content. It's practically identical to the admin, a few different font changes and font weights, but pretty much there. And if we compare it to the original, I'm not going to lie, for 3 hours of development, that's not bad. And that's fully editable by any content editor in the admin. Using all of our features and all of our new content types, they could change this up and do whatever they wanted with that. And we could take this further. We could allow them to configure that grid in the admin rather than it being static. We could add more options, and we could allow them to drag more different other content types in there to make this really powerful. And this was, as I said, 3 hours of development to enable anyone on your Magento instance to be able to build things like this, which in Magento, whenever I got given those designs, it wasn't a good day. So I'll leave it there and ask if you have any questions. Is John here? Anyone have a mic? I think we're lacking a mic. I think there was a question over here.
Hi, thanks for the introduction. This is Al from Allegra. So I just wanted to learn about the mobile side of these things. So how does it work in the PWA that we speak in this morning, and in general, maybe responsive design side of things, the drag and drop admin and stuff?
Yeah, so the responsive side of things is down to the content type to implement. As you'd expect with Magento, responsive less is just added to the front end, and then the elements will react. All the content types we ship with Magento already have responsive capabilities. And with the PWA side of things, we're in active conversations with the PWA team to make sure that we have parity between our features so there's full functionality across them. And we're looking into how we can make GraphQL work really well with our structured content. Any other questions? Cool. when I'm going to say we're done here. And that means everyone can get some food, which is a great time of the day. So thank you very much.